Welcome to episode 6 of the Game Week podcast powered by Keros, the number one solution for maximising preparation and performance in elite sport. I'm your host, Andrew Trimble, and every episode we'll be taking a deep dive behind the scenes of the elite sports world as we chat with key stakeholders in high-performance environments about their stories and how they manage their game week. This week we have two guests joining us, J Claffey and Byrne. James has been a lecturer in sport and exercise psychology for the past 12 years and has worked with Irish international soccer and rugby players. He's also worked comprehensively with GAA, football and hurling clubs for over 15 years at all levels. In the business area, James has provided organisational psychology workshops for the likes of Facebook and Google. Byrne is a sport and exercise scientist with an MSc in teaching and learning. He's a certified S&C specialist and currently DOC at Lourdes Celtic Football Club and lecturer in sports sciences. He's got 20 years experience coaching in multiple field-based evasion sports, including UK, Ireland and US collegiate athletes. James and Alan, welcome along to the Game Week podcast powered by Keros. It's great to have you guys along. Let's start really simply. We always start with this in this way. Why do you do what you do? James, do you want to kick us off? Why do you do what you do?
Yeah, a really good question. One that probably seems a lot simpler than it is, but I'm just going to use the word love. The reason why I do things that I do is the love and the passion that I have for them. I had a great upbringing from two fantastic parents, and my dad was really into sports, so I just fell in love with sport. And I always had a passion for academia because of my dad as well, so I was lucky to have that. And it's one of them things, for want of a better one in terms of a cliche, it's a lifelong learning that's a real love and a passion for myself.
Alan?
Yeah, I think James is kind of stolen love and passion. So I go with curiosity. It's kind of the more I've learned over the years in terms of the practical side of things, the academic side of things, the more I've wanted to learn, and the more I've kind of realised that there's so much out there to learn, and the more I have learned, the more kind of I've developed that passion for learning and helping athletes, players, coaches, kind of parents, like things. So for me, it's like a constant curiosity. It would be the best way I'd describe it.
Yeah, we might rebrand the podcast actually. Love and passion. We'll be discussing love and passion in a high performance environment. I do think that's important. I don't know if you remember Bruno Gara, whenever he was with the Crusaders, he was asked, and it seems like he's been influenced massively. Obviously, Racing, then moved to Crusaders. Seems like he's been influenced massively by those guys. And one of the big things he took away, I've heard him talk about this, is he talks about how much they care for each other, how much they love each other, how much they're prepared to go the extra mile for each other. That must be not just loving the sport, James, but loving the people you're working with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you hear a lot of anecdotal stories or from biographies, autobiographies, when players kind of finish up, as you were suggesting there, about how they would have liked to enjoy it a little bit more or appreciate the relationships that they had with people. And I think what we're seeing now more so with the kind of new age coach, for want of a better one, is that they're ploughing a lot of time and effort into human relationships. And I guess if you're going to spend so much time, if you think about high performing or elite athletes, they're spending probably as much time at training or with their teammates as they are with their families. So you're looking at that trade-off there, and why are you willing to put that amount of time into what you're doing? There has to be a passion, there has to be a love for it, and I've been quoted a couple of times as saying, always ask your athletes, how are they feeling when they're coming to your training sessions? How are they feeling when they're going to a game? There has to be some sort of enjoyment. I'm not saying that every time they're doing a hop and a skip into the session, it's not realistic, but there has to be an underlying love and as I said, passion for the sport that you're involved in.
Yeah, Alan, your experience as in S&C, I had a conversation with someone recently about this. The S&C role is the heartbeat of the team. Like that's like a cultural hub, and often the S&C is kind of close to everyone, has closer relationships. How have you found that, and how that's impacted your role?
Yeah, touching on what James has said, is you kind of never see a high performance environment based on bad relationships. So that's your key there right away. And if you allude to kind of interviews with athletes over the years, they'll always talk about the relationship with the coaches, the relationship with the support staff, prior to talking about high performance, prior to talking about methodologies and training practices. So it starts and ends with the relationships. My own take on it would be kind of that I'm veering more towards the holistic as I go on throughout my own career, because there's that realization that you could have the best facility, the best training methodology, the most qualified S&C staff, sports science support in the world. But if they haven't got those soft skills, the ability to interact with their athletes, they're not going to get very far. It's and simple things, as we said it, and we started off the podcast, which is fantastic, by emphasizing empathy. Empathy, understanding how they feel about certain situations, and having that open kind of line of communication that you can feel the athlete is a stakeholder. So it's not like an S&C coach or a sports psych and then we have the athlete. It's like we're both stakeholders in that performance. And in order to reach high performance, it's going to take us both, not one dictating to the other. And then the door closes. It's a constant kind of symbiotic relationship there.
That's really interesting, because with Keros, actually, we've talked about this quite a bit, about how a lot of platforms out there, a lot of communication is do this, do that, take players who are considered, maybe it's more transactional assets, take them by the hand, bring them onto the pitch, tell them what to do, give them a script. That doesn't work anymore, because we're all in the same team. It's not being told what to do anymore. Alan, how does that in a data-driven sport nowadays, when everything's maybe just a little bit more black and white than it should be, how do you manage that? Data-driven, black and white, but also having these complex relationships?
It's a conversation myself and James would have a lot. In terms of data-driven, we'd all had our nightmares with SPSS and different platforms kind of derive data, but data is mechanical, logical. Athletes are not. Athletes are biological. So when you deal with people, you're not dealing with numbers, and numbers don't tell the whole story. So for argument's sake, to give an anecdote, I could have an athlete come in to train, and it could be a moderate type training session we've got lined up that day. And the data tells us that his numbers are not great. His counter movement jump performance is not great. Maybe his sleep tracker is telling us he's only got 6 hours of sleep, but he could be feeling fantastic. He could be really motivated to go into that session and do well. So who do we listen to? Are we guided by the data? Are we guided by the athlete? Or do we use the data to supplement the athlete's experience? And that's where I think we should be looking, because I think we can become over-reliant now on technology to the point where we literally let it guide how we feel, how we think, how we act. And that can be a very dangerous area to go in terms of performance when we're dealing with human beings.
Yeah, very good. So there's obviously we're talking about the relationships and the impact of you guys kind of on the guys coming through and you being supportive of them. It's kind of it's a downward relationship. But what about the influences in you guys and some of the standout people from your journey and arriving at some of the philosophies that you stand for? Is there anybody stands out to you guys and that influence they've had on you, James?
Like I had mentioned my dad earlier. I'll never forget an experience. I think I would have been very young, but we were kind of left in a situation with a sports team. I think it was 14 or 15, and you're coming into that stage, adolescence, where you think you know everything. And a parent actually stepped up and took over the team that we were involved with. And a couple of the players, including myself, were having a go, saying, "Oh, look, he doesn't really know what he's doing, and this and that." And I'll never forget my dad saying, that parent has given up his time. And, the one key element that I've learned from that is value time. If you can value time and understand time and truly understand it with that relationship with your athletes, as Alan's after suggesting, then you're going to have a greater understanding for them and for yourself, and I've always said this, it's a key component that I spoke about it last week, and I got a little bit of interaction across Twitter. Myself and Alan spoke about it. We speak about timekeeping so often, but the comment I made was, are we actually good arrival timekeepers? Because we're watching the time to see is somebody on time, but how often are we looking at the end of the session? So we say the session finishes at 3 p.m, but we're going to 3:20. Now if an athlete was 20 minutes late at 12 at the start of the session, we'd have an issue with that. But for some reason, at the end of the session, and this is something that, I'd speak about with coaches who come for advice to me as well, is that actually, are we good timekeepers? Are we good arrival timekeepers? And again, that emphasis on time that my dad taught me about, so many years ago is something that I try to live my life by, to value time and also value other people's time, because if they're giving it up, regardless of their coaching qualification or what MSc they have or where they're coming from, they're giving it a time, and you've got to respect that.
Yeah, Alan, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I suppose in terms of my own influences, as I played as a teenager, kind of played soccer, and it would have been coaches that I had. And the funny thing, and we talk about this a lot, as time has gone on, sport has become more professional, standards have improved, there's courses, there's college degrees and everything now. When I played, there wasn't really so much, and guys had a basic kind of coaching license. But the big thing for me was I had a coach that, because he maybe didn't have a huge depth of knowledge in terms tactical, physical, psychological, he spent about 30 minutes talking to you about yourself. And by proxy, he leaned back into that. How are you? How has your week been? How's your mum and dad? How's things going? How did you find it? And now we've come full circle where guys with PhDs are realizing that's probably the most important thing.
Yeah, that's mad. It's like I always find this, actually, even just in S&C, there would have been, a model whenever you're, a youngster coming through, 14, 16, that high performance pathway, you're just starting that off, and there would have been, this is what we do. We do the yo-yo test, and then we don't do that. We do the bleep test, and then we do something else. And I can't even remember the names of them, but like, it tends to come for full circle. And I think that's the same for S&C. It's the same for loads. It's the same for fashion. It's the same for kind of sporting philosophies as well. You start off this way, and then actually someone else who's less qualified discovers something that it was staring at us the whole time. That's really interesting.
Or they're anchored to the basics already. And that's probably the most important thing. Like, in terms of the basics, we tend to, as we learn more, kind of look for that silver bullet to performance, to recovery, and we're all guilty of it. And it's always been there. It's under our nose. Like, we think of things like recovery, we think of sleep, nutrition, downtime. We already know all this. We know all this, but we seem to be on this holy grail of performance whereby we think there's going to be this massive breakthrough in research where that's how we recover. But the truth being, it's individualistic from person to person. There is no silver bullet, no panacea. It's just a stick to the basics and know the basics and do the basics well. In terms of S&C coaches, probably Byrne Gambetta would be one that I would look to in terms of how he approaches kind of strength and conditioning performance.
Yeah, great stuff. James, to your point there just before about arrival timekeepers, I've not had a conversation about that before. That slipped past. Oh, okay. And I think that's really interesting because back in the day with Ireland, it would have been Mikey Mcgrath with the foghorn, just making sure the transitions are sharp, just the session stays sharp. The intensity's high, and then everybody gets off the pitch and back into recovery straight away. So the way a lot of guys would have interpreted that was, we want to get the best out of ourselves, we want to get the best out of the team, and you're going to help us do that, and that's brilliant. But like, sticking to the plan, and it's timekeeping, but it's respect as well. So it's, there's cultural impacts if guys are late, arrival timekeepers, but there could be cultural impacts then if someone if the session runs on, you're sort of thinking this manager he's going to flog us, we're not going to be fit, he doesn't appreciate where we're at, he doesn't know, maybe he's not respecting us. Could there be further implications from that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's, I'm going to just try and answer both, because I think the point Alan made is interesting as well. In psychology, we're often referring to ultimate causation. So we're trying to find that, epiphany, what is it, what's the correct answer? But it's actually, it's one that's, it's evolving. It's something that's evolving all the time, and that's the interesting part, and that's why it keeps it fresh and it keeps it exciting for us. But in relation to, as you say, what message is it sending to the players? It doesn't mean that last part of the session is the most important, because if we look at human memory and we think of the recency effect, you're probably going to remember a lot more near the end of the session than you would during the session, or at the beginning of the session. You might remember little bits and bobs, but actually the research would, talk to us in the sense of saying at the start of the session and at the end, yeah, there's importance there. But if we think of Ireland, there's very few professional outfits across multiple sports. We have this, standoff with GAA where it's, it's classed as an amateur sport, etc. But they train professionally and everything about it is professional. But we don't have that many professional institutes. So when we think about it, we've got a lot of dual career athletes. So we've athletes who are either working and then playing sports at semi-professional level, or we've athletes who are in college and are playing at semi-professional level. So for them athletes, I gave an example last week online. Somebody was asking me about it, and a friend of mine was working up in just outside Derry, but lived in Dublin and had a 2-hour, 55-minute drive after the session. So if the session was meant to end at a certain time, for that person, the extra 15, 20, 25 minutes impacted on much more than just, sure, it's only 15 minutes. It's a lot more than that. And I think the key when we look at high performance is that we have to be wary that, let's say, the phenomenon of burnout, people often think, it's when people overtrain. Yeah, elements of it might be physiologically that they're overtraining, but what if they've to nearly overtrain and then they have to sit in a car for an hour and 45 after that? What if they have to travel back up the next day for an hour and 45 for a session that's classified as a recovery session as well? And I think that, Grant's done made a really good point about that on the previous podcast with yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about knowing that individual, knowing the nuances, and that could be an emotional thing. It could be to do with their sleep, their mood, could be personal circumstances, or it could be just something as obvious as commute, but spending time with players to know what their background is and know a little bit more detail about what's driving their performance. Is that fair enough, Alan?
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's interesting that we talk about stress in relation to recovery, because our body doesn't realise the difference between stress from a bereavement, a job loss, as it does stress from a training session. Stress is an imposed stress on a physical system. So if it's a thing that we're talking about recovery, and that extra 15 minutes impacts that individual in terms of stress, cortisol levels, if we want to go physiological, stress is stress. The body has to adapt to it, whether that stress be a life stressor, a physical stressor from a training load. It's all stress, and it all impacts performance and recovery.
Yeah, great stuff. I've heard you guys talk a little bit about performance coaching. Do you want to give me a high-level understanding of what performance coaching means?
I suppose I'll go first, Al, if that's okay. For me, when you're hearing so much about high performance and what does it look like, I think we made this point earlier in the show, and I think, Andrew, you were speaking about it, is that it's a combination of all the things. And I think the head coach has got to be of the understanding that there's a certain skill set that I have, and I'm employing, let's say, Alan to be my strength and conditioning coach. So if Alan's giving me information and he's qualified and it's an authentic source, I should be able to take that on board and not feel in any way, he's imposing his views on me or whatever it is. Likewise with, let's say, a sports psychologist, if they're bringing them in, there has to be a level of understanding around what they're doing. Okay, you might not have the same skill set, but you have to have a level of regulation that you understand what it is that they're bringing to your organisation. And all too often we see it, where organisations might have a really good SSC, really good sports psych, really good physio, and all of them, there has to be intercommunication among them. I mean, for me as a sports psych, obviously speaking to players one-to-one is a fantastic thing to do, and sometimes you get really good information from it. But actually, the relationship between a sports psych and the physio is massive, because if we think about even training that nurses get, there was a study done in 2011 by a guy called Stickley in relation to how nurses are meant to interact with patients. It's called the Shorty model, but one of the parts of it is actual physical touch. And when there's physical touch between people, there's actually this human connection, that's come through evolution. And essentially what it's saying is people are probably a little bit more aware, or they kind of let themselves go a little bit, and they might say something and give information to a physio that, they're sitting in a room or a sports psych, it might not necessarily happen. So therefore, the information that the physio is getting could be really important to the sports psych or to the head coach or whatever it is then again. And this is where that intercommunication between all of these sub-disciplines, if that's there and the head coach understands it, then for me, that's providing a high performance unit. It's not necessarily to do with, we've spent €3 million up there in Abbottstown, for example, and the facilities are fantastic. To me, high performance is that interconnection from the sub-disciplines, and then it's how the athletes feel when they're in that environment.
Great stuff, Alan.
Yeah, completely. It's an intriguing kind of question. It's like, I like to start off with what's performance? And then if we know what performance is, then what's high performance? We're going to build on that. And it is that multidisciplinary approach. So if you're going to enter into a kind of, let's say, high performance environment, you'd want to be assured that everybody is kind of singing off the same hymn sheet, for want of a better word. So if it's a sports psych, a sports scientist, sports nutritionist, and they've all come together, have they all agreed on what the actual term means? What does high performance mean? And once we have that agreement upon this is what it means, okay, how are we going to impact that environment? What is our high performance philosophy per se? And what does it look, feel, sound like to ourselves and to the athletes? So it can be a term that's thrown around without much substance, but it is that multidisciplinary approach, as James has alluded to, and the athletes are stakeholders, and I'll emphasise that. They have to be stakeholders in how that environment is driven, how it's kind of reviewed, reflected upon, and kind of put into place. So it's a collaborative vision upon an agreed term. That's the way I would kind of define it, for want of a better word.
Yeah, great stuff. James, just when you mentioned there, the physio being in touch or being on the same page as the psychologist, that's really important, and I can definitely identify with what you're saying. I don't know how many heart-to-hearts I've had with the physio sitting on the plinth. I'd imagine that happens a lot because there's a connection there. It's a one-on-one. It's very different from a relationship being watered down whenever it's a group session. Alan, maybe in your experience, there's probably been something similar as well with an S&C. And S&C has a big impact on an athlete, especially in the early days. And they're the kind of when a player's maybe more open-minded and kind of maybe open to ideas. Alan, you must have found yourself, having kind of close relationships with guys that you're able to tap into something and maybe just understand them better and maybe tap into something that someone else can't see.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you're working you're asking people to trust you first of all. So that's a big thing. And especially with young athletes, kind of gaining that trust takes time. So your first 2, 3, maybe 4 longer weeks of a program are going to be getting to know each other, getting to kind of create a love of movement, a love of S&C has this kind of strange connotation in that it's strength and condition. Okay, it's a generic kind of gym-based approach to development, where realistically it's not. It's a whole lot more than that. It's a whole lot more, and understanding how people move is one thing, and how they get better physically, can fitter, stronger, faster type thing, but understanding what motivates them to do that and create an environment in which they can come in, feel safe, feel trusted, and be open with it and say, look, I'm not feeling this today, or I didn't enjoy the last session, and not feel that you're going to be critical of them or hold it against them. And being able to take that little bit of criticism where to say, listen, I don't necessarily enjoy doing the kind of speed power work on a Monday because of X, Y, and Z. I do on the weekend. Is there any way we can move that around? And you have to be humble enough and kind of leave the ego at the door to say, do you know what? I need to listen to you. But if I do listen to you and it doesn't work, I want you to listen back to me then, and let's have a look at it again. So it kind of goes both ways. It's that stakeholder relationship again, isn't
That's what I was going to say, Alan. Or there must be times when you've got an athlete who maybe isn't quite as genuine as you might expect them to be. They say, listen, I didn't really enjoy that. And you're saying you didn't enjoy it because you didn't want to do that, not because you think it impacted your performance. There must be times whenever you have to call guys out as well. And again, you'll have a bit of intuition into how something's being delivered if you've spent time with them and you know the character. Have you found that, Alan?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you get guys into a gym on a Monday. I was working with 3 GAA teams there about 2 years ago, youth athletic development phase, and the teams weren't doing so well on the pitch. Don't really know why. Tac, psych, we don't really know why. We were looking into it, and I had a session on the Mondays with them after getting beat 4 or 5 weeks in a row, and all of a sudden it's is the S&C working? We're getting beat every weekend, and then they're not coming in motivated on the Monday, and then they start questioning. It's kind of, maybe it's the S&C, maybe it's the tactics. You've got to create that buy-in to say, listen, long-term athletic development, this is not a short-term fix. This is long-term athletic development. It's going to help you as an athlete right into your 20s. This is looking at enabling you to have a long career in the sport. It's not about me making you fitter, stronger, faster to win next week. That drive and motivation comes from within. But you try and get them to buy the bigger picture, to buy into it. So it is tough to motivate them, particularly after the losing games. No one likes to lose. And then we like to attribute losses to things outside of ourselves because it's easy, isn't it? So that kind of buy-in to say, look, you didn't lose this week, we lost this week. I lost. If you lost, I lost. So now we've got to both reflect on our performance and see what we can do to win the next game.
James, have you any thoughts on that, even just for thinking about the psychology of the individual athlete?
Yeah, 100%. And I guess I'm even selfishly thinking of the sports side, because I'm thinking of a story that a colleague of mine tells when he just finished his undergraduate thesis, and he'd gone into a little bit of applied work, but he was qualified at the time as a sports psych, and the coach was like, look, we really want to bring you in and get you involved, and look, we'll trust your lead and everything else. So I think, let's say there was 20 teams in the league that they were in, and they were 19th the season previous, and they finished 18th or 17th the next season. And the first one to go was the sports side, because it hadn't worked. So I was smiling when Alan was saying it there, because it's that attribution again. Is it the sports psych who, and Alan would know this because we've done work together in the past. I'd often show that image of Harry Potter and say, this is what sports psychology isn't. There's no magic wand that you can throw at something and all of a sudden in one calendar year or one calendar season, a team will go from being in that position, and all of a sudden there's too many moving parts. It's ecological in that sense. So for me, athletes will have that approach, and again, you've got a responsibility as a coach, you've got a responsibility as a background staff, or this interdiscipline kind of background. We're the ones now collectively who have to pick these players up. We're the ones who have to say, this is where we're getting closer, trusting the process. But what if the process is faulty? And that's the constant part where I always say, we're mammals, we're creatures of habit, but the only real differentiation we have for all the other mammals on the planet is that we've the power of introspection. So how often do we reflect? How often do we really look at ourselves? And as Alan said there, a team loses. Well, what was wrong with our approach? Not what was wrong with the player's approach. What was wrong with our approach that week or that month or whatever it is? And it takes a lot. It takes a lot, because people throw the word reflection around. But it's difficult to look at yourself and say, okay, maybe I need to improve on this or that. And that's where I think earlier, like when we were asking about, have you people you trust? That's the essence of having a good mentor, having someone that you can bounce things off. And even on an everyday level, like I might ring Alan. I rang Alan last week. The conversation started off with, "Hi, how are you?" It went into genealogy. We were talking about epigenetics. It's just it flows from there, and this is the whole thing about human relationships. You have to have somebody that you trust that will give you authentic feedback. That's going to be worthwhile putting into practice, if that makes sense.
Yeah, good stuff. So even from you looking in at a team environment and picking up on little nuances and characters and on what's going on kind of behind the scenes and just getting to know guys a little bit better, there must have been times, I always think with sports psychology, if the athlete drives it, they're a part of it. It's their idea. They're going to stand over something. They're going to be more committed to any kind of process that's put in place. But there must have been times, even being aware of that yourself, there must have been times whenever you've been tempted and you've spotted a guy and said, I know I can get more out of him. If he would just come to me, I can unlock something. You must have been tempted to spark that conversation and maybe slightly artificially create that starting point.
Yeah, I get, and look, the temptation will be there, and I guess we all have that kind of day-to-day existence where we could probably improve on little elements or whatever it is. But I would be really I'd be remiss if I said otherwise. I kind of try and leave it as organic as possible. But I've said this in the past. If you're asking somebody, how are you, like Alan alluded to his coach when he was younger, asking, how are you? The power of that. But we're living in a society now, and it's changed obviously with COVID, I guess. But I recall so often where I'm asking somebody how they are, and I'm walking by them on an alleyway or a hallway in work, and you're saying, how are you? But you're not really asking them how they are. So when you might see something like an athlete like that, or you're hearing the bits and bobs, it's important to just ask that question, how are you? And people generally will open up about it. If there is, and Alan said it earlier, you have to have some relationship with them, and that might be built up a little bit of laughing and joking or trying.
Can I just jump in on that for 1 second, James? Can I jump in on that for 1 second? Andrew, we sat in the park bench there about 2 weeks back, and we got a sandwich and a coffee, and we were sitting down having a chat about all sorts of things sport related, and there was an elderly man kind of walking by, and we were mid-eating our sandwich, and James happened to say to him, how are you? 45 minutes later, we knew everything about him. James had literally asked him, how are you? He had told us about multiple operations he'd had in the past week, and sandwiches went cold. But like at the end of the day, it probably changed that man's day, week, or month, because James had simply said, how are you? And it gave me the impression that not many people had asked him how he was that day or that week.
Yeah.
But that opening up is amazing when you actually see it happen in a sport environment or not. It's fantastic to see.
I wonder if that the impact of that how are you is maybe even watered down by if someone says how are you, I might open up, I might share something that I might otherwise not have shared. If a psychologist asks me how I am, I might be a little bit more guarded because I think, what can I say here? But don't say that.
It's Is it a loaded question? It's the witch doctor effect. It's that kind of thing of the white coat syndrome. So, and when I first met James, it probably took me a year to open up to him. But the kind of James was actually a lecturer of mine. That's what kind of drove me into sports science, believe it or not. And I kind of, after a while, I was like, why is he constantly asking me how I am? Why is he constantly asking people how they are? And it takes a while for you to get used to that. And I don't know whether it's a cultural thing in Ireland. It's like we almost see it like a detective. Does you want to know more? It's no, genuinely, how are you? It's that kind of suspicion of emotion.
What are you up to?
And and in kind of high performance, often alpha male dominated environments, not good to have emotions. It's not good to open up. It's not good, it can be seen as a sign of weakness at times. So normalizing the fact of, normalizing saying, how are you? Like normalize it. How are you? How's things? How are you?
And I think and I think as well, a lot of that came from when I was younger. I went to the USA. I was living in Tennessee, and basically over there, I kind of came to grips with when you'd ask somebody how fantastic, beautiful day today, and it just changed my mindset completely. And then, I think it was a study in UCD a couple of years ago. They done, what was the largest proportion of Irish responses when how are you, and it was not too bad. And even the phrasing of that is, I'm not too bad, I'm bad, but I'm not too bad.
Or grand,
so
grand,
I'm grand. So it's a very Irish orientated thing that, well, look, is a half full, is a half empty, whatever. But again, as Alan said, it's you will have both of that, Andrew. You'll have the ones who will go, why is the psych asking me how am I doing, or am I okay? But then you'll have other people who are kind of, maybe loitering around, just kind of, and then you'll go, hey, how's things? Are you all right, Jimmy? Let's say, for example, yeah, grand. Would I be able to have a chat with you? Yeah, absolutely, no problem. So there's the two sides to it, and as you said, sometimes that white coat syndrome is still there. I guess if we look at elite sport, say 99% of the sports psychs now are calling themselves performance coaches because of what's gone on with the use and the stigma based around that word psychology, I guess.
I think even when I studied in the undergrad, they didn't call it sports psychology; it was behavioural science. So it's even the branding of the name makes a big difference.
I'm really interested, James, to get into exactly how GA athletes, obviously Gaelic footballers, I've heard you refer to them as double jobbers. So I'm really interested in the difference in the psychology between fully professional athletes who are in a bubble. They're in almost like a subculture, and Gaelic footballers, double jobbers, who they have they've got maybe more balance, but they also potentially might have more baggage and more issues and more stuff going on behind the scenes. Have you any thoughts on that, James?
Yeah, look, it's something myself and Alan would have conversations about quite regularly, about different types of athletes and different sports, and these dual career athletes, these double jobbing there is a lot of baggage, as you suggest, that comes with it. But we had a situation. This is 6, 7, 8 years ago. We were going into a relatively big semi-final game, and one or two of the players didn't quite perform in the game. So, of course, you're debriefing, you're trying to find issues and this, that, and the other. And it turned out that one of the kind of players who had been having a really good season, scoring lots of points and goals and stuff like that, it just didn't happen in the game. But actually, when we examined that day, they were up really early. They had whatever happened that day, their partner couldn't drop their children to school, so they had to do that. Then they had to go into work. They had finished work then. They had to collect the children, drop them off to their parents, which was on the other side of the city. When they came back for the game then that evening, they actually had just picked up, I think it was like a wrap or something in one of the shops that was close. And you could see it in the performance. And this is the key that I'd often say with dual career athletes. Whatever about professional athletes, their week is planned for them. So 90% of the hydration, the recovery, the diet, nutrition, the extra carbs might be needed a day after performance, whatever that is, that's tended to be done for them. But when we come to these dual career athletes, they're in a position where actually I've got to become an expert in preparation. And if I'm an expert in preparation, then my performance has a greater chance of being where it needs to be. But all of them different variables that happen with these dual career athletes are there and will probably be around, because that's a little thing we call life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wonder, just the comparison with professional athletes, I think I've come across plenty of professional athletes who have they've got all of the performance stuff is in place. It's in a good place. But again, if we're talking about not seeing an athlete as an asset and just being a little bit more fluid and holistic in our approach, then the psychology of the professional athlete might be slightly compromised in that's an artificial environment. That's a subculture. And see, when you come out of that, as I have done in the last few years, you get culture shock, and then you start to realize this isn't the way we behave here is not the way and what we value and how we get on. It's great and I love it, but it's different to what's going on out here. Whereas maybe Gaelic footballers have a better balance of that. And maybe it's a slightly artificial environment. Do you think that could potentially impact athletes in a different way, James?
Yeah, I think psychologically it absolutely can. I think in the All-Ireland final last year or the previous year, I think it was something like 88 or 91% of the players who started the game, they had all gone through college, third level college, so they'd all played Sigerson Cup during at some stage. So they'd all been involved in college at some stage, and I think that's a good indication for the GAA that they are working on something outside that little bubble, as you said, and that can be misconstrued. We see athletes who have real issues with career transition. You might come away from a professional sport with a good bit of money, but what happens after that? Well, by nature we're creatures of habit, so routine is something that we strive for. We're much calmer. Our systems, our hypothalamus in our brain actually decreases in size when we're calmer if we've got routine and stuff. So actually, on a day-to-day basis, routine is so important to us. But then when we come out of that, what do we want? Again, we want routine. And there's no wonder that we see issues around addiction to gambling, addiction to alcohol, addiction to drugs, because it's something that they're going to do continually as part of their routine, because they've been routine-based for so many years. I think, obviously one of Ireland's greatest ever players, Paul Mcgrath, has had many issues, which he talks about in his autobiography. But one of the problems was, he finished training, it could be 1 o'clock in the day, and he was a footballer. So what do I do with the rest of the day? And that's where the start of that process takes place for athletes as well. So it is, I would suggest with you, having an idea of what, you are a person who plays rugby. you're Andrew who plays rugby, but you're still Andrew at the end of the day. You're Alan who's involved with S&C. That's great. You're one of the best in the country, but you're still Alan at the end of the day. So, and this is the problem with injury. So if James is training all the time, has these physical loads, but the stress is outside the sport, and I'm involved in sport because I've got the passion and love for sport, all of a sudden James gets injured. All of them stressors now are magnified because I don't have the cathartic release of sport anymore. And I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah, very good, Alan. Let's get into some great stuff here, and it's actually been a common theme with a few conversations we've had about just seeing athletes as more than just a black and white performer, seeing them as a person and having that holistic approach to high performance. Let's get into the game week just before we finish. I want to get an idea of what your focuses are, or how you drive the agenda in the run up to a game. Alan, what's the key focuses at the start of the week, and then how does that transition as the week unfolds towards game day?
Okay, so if we take preparation being the minute the first game finishes, we kind of look at our recovery being almost a return to baseline or equilibrium, if you want to call it. We want to get the body back to balance physically, so we kind of look at a 48-hour window of, okay, that's going to take that amount of time. So we've 2 recovery days, then we're going into preparation for the week right up to game day -1. From a physical standpoint, we'll obviously agree a certain set of criteria that we're going to work on in the gym, on the pitch, whether it be small-sided condition games, strength, speed, power work in the gym. It'll all be agreed upon by the team multidisciplinary boys, but we factor in a lot of recovery throughout the week. And this is something I speak a lot with James about, is that recovery is training. And we need to kind of move away from this thing that it's an afterthought or it's a byproduct of training. It potentiates performance. So optimal recovery potentiates performance. So we spend a huge amount of time educating the athletes with regard to, we finished one game, we're now in the preparation stage for the next game, but in that window between, we need to optimize recovery. So for every training day we would have, whether they be high, moderate or easy, we'll factor in recovery in line with the type of training we do that day. And we will try and optimize, obviously, nutrition strategies. Whatever the recovery is, we talk to the athletes about, okay, what kind of recovery works for you? And placebo is a real thing. We like to kind of think it's not, but research, the literature suggests that it is. So if somebody comes to us and says, listen, I've kind of got this new massage going and, I've kind of little bit of an issue with the calf and I've been working it out, and we know the literature's kind of telling us it's a placebo, we don't kind of pull them into a corner and sit them down and start waffling about academia. We basically say to them, oh, that's good, yeah, it's an extra little thing you can add into your recovery now. It's not going to do them any harm, but we've got to be very clever with how we almost manipulate that situation to benefit the athlete.
That's really good, because athletes just, I think, want to be told, yes, you're flying. You don't need to get them bogged down in S&C and in training loads, picking at the correct time of the season. Yes, I think athletes just want to know you're fit, you're fast, you're ready to perform. Another thing that kind of ties into this is the routine. I find a lot of athletes have this routine. It's similar to the recovery gun. It could be rational, it could be really well thought through, or it could be completely irrational. But that's been my routine for 5 years. It seems to be working. And if I'm telling myself that I won't play well if I don't do that routine, then although it doesn't make sense, it does make sense. Keep doing it. So that kind of brings us, that kind of narrative and that mindset of athletes, I think, brings us into, obviously, Keros is a communication platform for elite sports teams, and we specialize in delivering that communication. We've really prioritized that because we feel like that's a great area we can add a lot of value to sports teams. How important is communication, and how difficult is ineffective communication in your experience, fellas? James, you want to fire away?
I guess I remember a very long time ago now, actually, and reading something about, at a base level, communication has to have a sender and a receiver. And, it doesn't matter what you're saying if they don't take it on board, or it doesn't matter how many lovely, elegant terms you have. If they don't understand it, then, it's not good communication. So you've got to find I suppose, activities and things that you can use for good communication. And you know, as you're alluding to there, whether it's some sort of technology that you can use or whatever it is, there has to be some overlying method where you communicate to them and they can communicate back. And it's not just a case of, you know, we hear so often about, I'm an active listener, or, you know, using your listening skills, but all too often someone's asking a question, and you can see, I see this with my students all the time, and I was a devil for it in the past, where you can see them itching to answer. You know, you haven't got midway through your question, but they're itching to answer. I always alluded to the leaving cert with English and the leaving cert. So I remember, like, let's say it's Hamlet, and the question is on Hamlet, but someone just says the word Hamlet and they write down everything that they know got to do with Hamlet, but that's only the first word at the start of it. So there has to be an understanding of what the message is before you can answer the question. So communication is absolutely vital. Between the background staff, absolutely, that we've kind of alluded to that, but what kind of messages are we sending, both consciously, subconsciously, verbally and non-verbally, to our athletes? You know, somebody comes up and says, listen, I'm not going to make it tomorrow. My child isn't too well at the moment, so I'm not going to make the session. I have to be at home, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, that's okay. And you're saying, yeah, that's okay, but you're literally after going eyes up to the heaven, or you're looking the other way. And that message can have a far greater impact than you think. That athlete's in the car driving home thinking, my child has got an appointment in the morning, and my manager, who's meant to have a great relationship with me, has told me it's okay, but shrugged his eyes up to the heavens. So, I mean, earlier you're alluding to what would, you know, players do. Ronan O'Gara talking about what would they do for each other? Well, family understands that type of thing, and that's an important element to any communication spectrum, I guess.
Yeah, great stuff, Alan. Anything to add?
Yeah, definitely. No, it's a little bit of a cliche, but I said this to James the other day. The right message delivered the wrong way is the wrong message, and it's a thing of, the better you get to know somebody, the easier that communication becomes. So it's putting in a shift nearly to get to know somebody on a base level, you know, without having to use really complex terms or terminologies or have big, massive discussions about how we communicate our message. It's getting to know somebody enough to know how they're going to respond to that message, and checking for understanding is a major thing as well. I think we often kind of dictatorial in fashion kind of tell athletes, like we said at the beginning, what to do, but we very seldom go back to them and say, did you understand what I said there? What's your understanding of what I'm asking you to do? And more often than not, when we do check for understanding, we find there's little kind of, it's almost like Chinese whispers when it gets around the room. There's bits going to go missing here and there, or they're not going to kind of perceive what you said as you kind of imagined it to be. So that checking for understanding and kind of having that little two-way back and forward to ensure that the quality of the message is there at the end is really important. So communication is probably the most important thing for me.
Brilliant. Great Absolutely. Stuff, fellas. That's been a really fascinating conversation. Just to finish, you guys are running a performance coaching diploma, an academic 12-week course. Do you want to tell us a bit more information about that, where guys can find out about it?
Yeah, Al, do you want to, or will I? Or?
Yeah, you go ahead.
Yeah, it's something, I guess 4 or 5 years ago we spoke on some of the certification being delivered, whether that was in person, online, from different national governing bodies. And I guess we're getting closer to the stage where, you know, beginners, people who might be starting off in coaching might not have a lot of experience, and that could be in a business environment, that could be on a coaching perspective, or a personal trainer in a gym, or a gym practitioner, whatever it may be. We said, you know, there's no real course out there that's just focusing on performance, you know, and you know, most of what we do on a day-to-day basis, whether you're a drummer, whether you're a soccer player, you're a Gaelic player, it's all based off your performance. So we've created this 12-week diploma with that in mind, to upskill people on the basics of all these elements of performance. So basic ideas around nutrition, sports and exercise, performance nutrition, S&C, which obviously Alan's phenomenal with. We're going to speak about lifestyle events and processes around lifestyle, and then even the importance of having exercise in our day-to-day routine, and obviously maintaining good mental health through all of them, because you can have these pillars of health like good diet, sleep, obviously exercise, etc., but all of them pillars, they'll often be reliant on good mental health, so we're going to focus on that as well within the 12 weeks there as well. Al, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, no, I was just saying it was kind of an annoyance of ours over years. We used to talk about the frustration at academia not translating across well in practical terms with some coaches, and we'd often have coaches say to us, I like your stuff, I like what you're saying, but I don't understand certain terms, or I don't understand the theory of this. I want to know how to apply it in a real sense. So more pracademic, if you want of a better word. But we've kind of looked at that and said, well, can we demystify a little bit of this, like we talked earlier about athletes that want to know about training loads. But we can tell them about it, but just not use the strong theoretical academic background and show them in a practical sense, well, this is how we can help people perform in a very practical way. Backed by the research, obviously. But make it more practical, more usable. And
very
that's
good.
The
Very good.
thinking behind it.
That sounds like it's completely unique, and it sounds like it would be really useful to a lot of guys. So we wish you every success with that, and hopefully you get people joining in.
Cheers.
Listen, thank you so much, fellas, for getting involved and coming on and sharing your thoughts. It's been a fascinating discussion. We wish you well with the future.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Andrew.
Yeah, lovely to meet
Cheers,
you.
fellas.
Thank you so much for having us on.